Sorry, you probably didn't hear any of that because I was muted. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you're tuning in today. I'm your product specialist, Nick Bell, for the day. Joining me is Chris Payeur, who will be coming in any second now. Chris, what's up, man? Sorry, you probably saw that I was all muted there.
No problem, Nick. How are you, man?
I'm doing well, doing well. Good to see you today. I think this is your last stream with in tandem with Tony or I, right?
It's going to be my last one with you, but I got one last one with Tony next week, and then I'll be starting to fly solo on the live stream starting late June, I believe.
Perfect, man. Awesome, awesome. Well, glad to have you aboard, and I look forward to watching and supporting your streams as we move forward. So today, everyone, we're talking about, Chris and I, our favorite high gain amp models. We have a couple, a couple sitting here to show you guys. I'm going to kind of just take a back seat, let Chris do his thing, and then, and I'll come in, whenever. But again, even though we're talking about high gain amp models and stuff, really any question you guys have, feel free to just, type it in, ask, Our subjects for these live streams are really just like placeholders to give us, some fun stuff to talk about. And, and our viewers always have some amazing questions, and, they get us going down different rabbit holes, learning new stuff, and just talking shop, and that's why we're here, So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of, switch it over to the main view to you, Chris, and, show us what you got. I'm going to mute myself, and I'll just be here in support on the back end. And all right, Chris, we'll take it away.
Thanks, Nick. Cool. Thanks, Nick. So today, as you said, we're going to talk more about high gain amplifier models, and a funny thing is that subconsciously I got 4 presets. I made 4 presets for today, and subconsciously I did 4 presets that span over the decades in a way. So the first preset that I have prepared for today is based on the solo lead overdrive amp, which is really the father of high gain in a way. Every band from the late 80s that use higher gain amps really played on that kind of model. So every preset today is going to be different. As I said, it's going to really span over decades and the difference in the sounds. So this one is paired with the Cali V30 amp. For this one I used the 414 and the 160 mics. The 160 is fairly bright and the 414 is fairly mid-forward, and the amp itself is really mid-forward, so it's a nice complement. And I played with the position of the mics and the distances just so I can dial in the sound to my taste. I got a little bit of reverb, just a room reverb, just so it doesn't sound as dry. And I got a quick Scream 808 overdrive in front of the amp just to tighten it up a bit. And the last block I got here is kind of a trick that I use to cut down on the mud, because on the Revstar that I have here, the pickups are fairly high output, so sometimes it can get a bit muddy to my taste. So what I do is I just use the low high shelf EQ block, and I just leave everything as is except for the low gain here, and it just turned out a bit to minus 0.6 dB. So it's not that drastic of a cut, but it helps clear up the sound a bit. So as I said, very 80s. So it's not going to be metal just yet in terms of sound, but it's going to be fairly high gain. So just a quick example. So just enough for overdrive to do solos as well, but not to the point where everything falls apart in the low end. It's still tight, especially because of that 808 that I put in front. It helps really tighten up the sound and bring that mid-forward bite to the sound. And then I feel like those kind of amps really pair well with a bigger cabinet size with modern type of speakers like the V30 and just mics that are not going to enhance the bass part of the spectrum. So that would be the first entry for today. Then, so that covers the 80s more or less. Then we're going to switch over to the 90s with the Ubersonic amp model. So really, the main difference between this one and the solo lead is that this one is way more bassy. It's got a lot of gain as well, but it's really more in the bass part of the EQ that it shines in a way compared to the solo lead. So it's way more of an amp for rhythm guitar sounds. Tons of gain on tap. It's a really high gain amp, and it's paired with the Mandarin EM cabinet with an 84 mic almost right in the center of the dust cap, and a 7 dynamic just a bit off the center, but not too far from it, because the bass, the amp itself is super bassy. So I really wanted to focus on the higher end of the frequency range. No degrees, no angles on the mics, but all the cabs today are going to have fairly aggressive high cuts. I tend to set them in a way that it would replicate a real speaker's frequency response. So it's fairly aggressive in terms of the Helix, since it's a full range unit, but it's really closer to a real speaker in real life. So yeah, so the Ubersonic, and here I got the Horizon Drive because again, it's a very bassy amp. I'm going to turn it off and let you hear how it sounds without it, and you'll hear that it gets real muddy real quick. As soon as I need to do some more articulate picking patterns, it's just going to disappear basically. So it's not that bad, but it would need more definition. So if I just turn the Horizon Drive on, and now let's just hear what this preset, well, what I made it for. So it's really, the focus of that preset for me was really more of the grungy kind of part of music from the 90s. So really grungy and kind of sludgy in a way. It's really high gain, really bass focused, even though I got the Horizon Drive set fairly aggressively with the attack here at 3. It remains tight enough for me, but not too much where it sounds really modern. So that's a good complement to such a bassy amp like the Ubersonic. So that would cover what I like about the 90s for high gain kind of sounds. Then we're going to switch over to the king of the 2000s for me, which is the Meteor amp model. So really high gain, bassy again, but not as much as the Ubersonic. A lot more for a mid-forward bite than the Ubersonic as well. So the drive isn't set that high on this one. The EQ is focused on the higher end of the spectrum again. And if I go down here, you can see that the mid boost is on, because these amps really are scooped if you don't turn up the mids on these ones. So the cab for this amp today is going to be the Uber's T75 with a 160 off the edge of the cap and a 47 with a 45. No angle on this one. I thought I did put one, but that's going to be a straight facing. And then once again, fairly aggressive high cuts on each of them. So 7.3 and 7.7. Just once again to replicate the real frequency range of a guitar speaker. And then I paired it with the Minotaur overdrive, just really to tighten up the sound once again. So if we hear it without, it's going to be fairly bassy. Not as bad as the Ubersonic once again, but it could use a bit of tightening up in the low end. So if I just turn it on, so a bit more modern sounding than the previous preset, but not super tight like the kind of metal that you would hear nowadays. But it's just a perfect medium. So we're really getting in the higher gain territory here with the Meteor. It's a fairly higher gain amp in itself, and then with the addition of the Minotaur, it gets really it gets screaming. So for the last preset that I made, which is probably my favorite amp model, is going to be based around the Vitriol lead. I think it's the best, one of the best additions there was to Helix in terms of high gain amps. I really bonded with it. So this is probably one of my go-tos most of the time, depending on what I need to do. It's a fairly high gain amp as well. So I didn't set it too high because I always add an overdrive in front of it, because once again, these amps can sound kind of loose. So the gain is almost in the middle, and then once again the EQ is set fairly towards the higher end, and then everything else here, the bias is set fairly high, so I can still have a bit of mids. Bias X is down to tighten up the sound. Preset is fairly high, and depth is at smack dab in the middle, just so we can keep the bottom end together. For this one, I paired with the Uber V30 amp cabinet model, and I kept the two mics that were set by factory with that cap, just so I can do different things that I normally do. So both of them are going to be using the 47 condenser mic. I did play with the positions because they're very bright sounding. They weren't my favorite, especially if you use two of them at the same time instead of just mixing with another mic. So I did play with the positions to make them sound a bit darker. They're fairly far away from the dust cap, so bear that in mind. And then once again, both of them are going to have fairly aggressive high cuts, more aggressive than the previous ones, because once again it's a really bright sounding mic. And then one of them has a 45-degree angle, once again to tame some of that high end off. And with the Vitriol, I used the Hedgehog D9 overdrive. So similar to the Scream 808, it's going to tighten up the sound and bring a bit of mids to it all. So let's hear it without. So it's still fairly tight. You can hear there's a lot of bottom end to it. So let's just activate the D9 and hear how it's. So we're really getting in the super high gain territory, and it's going to be able to cover a lot of the more modern sounding stuff, especially if you were to put the Horizon drive in front of it and put the attack setting fairly high. It's going to get super tight and gated and genty in a way. So that's definitely one of my favorite amps in Helix. It's a formidable addition since firmware 3.5. So it's really an awesome amp. It can cover a lot of territories, but that's the more modern stuff is what it's made for. So those would be my 4 presets spanning over the 80s all the way from the 80s to today. Once again, they're all really high gain in my book, but most of them will clean up really well with the volume pot, as you may have heard on the Ubersonic preset. So just feel free to try them and try every cab and mic combination with them, and I bet you'll be able to get great sounds out of it. So I think that's pretty much it on my end. I'm curious to see what Nick has to say and what he's going to bring to the fold with his presets today.
Well, first off, man, let me say that was a killer deep dive, and I really like how you kind of broke them down, for, per era, 80s, 90s, today kind of a thing, and that PV, that last one you were using, it had, especially when you kicked on that D9, it had like a really like kill switch engage vibe, you know what I mean? So I really dig it. Awesome stuff, man.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So yeah, totally, it would get into those territories. So it's perfect for people who would down tune as well. So since the D9 is going to really tighten up the low end, it's going to get you in those kind of territories with bands like Killswitch Engage and Periphery and that kind of more modern metal.
Perfect, man. Awesome. Well, I just had these on the back burner, and so when it comes to the high gain amp models, for me, in regards to favorites, they're ever changing. It's kind of a flavor of the month. One month I like one amp more than the other, or an amp I was probably not a fan of. I'll play around with it, and now I'm a fan of it. And with this new cab engine we have, I feel like amps that I wasn't a huge fan of, now I am. And so, just the power of this new cab engine just kind of, showing what these amps can do and stuff. So, really all I had were 3 amp models. And so, with these 3 amp models here, I'll just do this kind of thing. So with my first amp model, it would be the Mandarin Rocker. And so this probably wouldn't be one of the first amps you would think of when you're doing something high gain. But me being a huge fan of Marshall and that just kind of that class AB kind of sound, I feel like I get that out of this amp, and it's just a really nice amp that cuts. And again, like what we were seeing in your presets, Chris, bias X, I tend to always turn that down low. For those who don't know, it's a power amp control, and pretty much when you turn this lower in lower registers, it tightens up the low end of your sound. But it has this bite to it. It has some teeth. That just really cut. And I'm just using some room reverb to kind of just lift it up a bit so we're not too dry. And an overdrive I paired with this would be the Payeurs. Now that might be a little much, but hey, if you need that little extra push off the cliff, that'll get you there. And again, like what you were using, even I'm using the Mandarin EM cab, and I'm using that 47 FET, that condenser mic. And and we're using it on both cabs here, but I have one at a 45-degree angle, and another one that's pretty close to the cap. As we see here, it's on the cap edge. So that's what we got there. Let's see here. We got just a quick question coming in from Chuck. Dumb question. Does this also apply to the Pod Go? Yes and no. So the amp models we're using today, you will find in Pod Go, but the cabinets are still legacy cabs in Pod Go. So this new cab engine I'm talking about and showing off is currently only available in Helix and HX products, but for Pod Go, just the amp models. So whatever we're talking about in regards to effects and amps, you'll have that in your Pod Go. But the only thing missing would be the cab models. And are they going to, just to beat everyone else to the punch, are these going to be available in Pod Go? I'm not sure, but it would be great to see something. But yeah. So I have the Mandarin rocker kind of going from lighter high gain to higher gain. My next one would be the Line 6 Electric. This is anytime you see Line 6 in front of an amp model, it's a Line 6 original. And so this amp just really, really cooked. It has this kind of, really big emphasis on the mid-range. All sorts of stuff with this amp. So that's probably one of my go-tos whenever I'm doing something kind of high gain and such. And really, again, just like what you were doing, Chris, you could always throw an overdrive in front, the Minotaur, a Scream 808, those always work really well. And I tend to keep the gain low, just like how you were doing, and, it just kind of tightens up that low end. So, again, without the overdrive, you have a lot of that low end, but if we crank on that Minotaur, I'm not really adding a whole lot of gain there, but I'm just really tightening up that low end. And for the cab, what we're using here is just, two of the same cab, a Cali V30, where we have a 906 dynamic, and that 47 FET. There's just something about that high mid-range of that 47 FET that can just really, really send your tone to, to that level where it just, really, really cuts. And, and so not to take up any, too much more time, the Archetype lead. Now, this amp, is also a very, very heavy amp. Let's hear the sound that and it has that kind of that classic, gosh, I don't know, like Exciter, old school kind of 90s thrash type of sound. I think this amp would be perfect for anyone who's in that kind of genre of music. It just has that classic kind of mid-range tone there. And what you can see in these presets, I'm not really scooping the mids all too much, and I don't think you were doing much of that either in your tones, Chris. But the mid-range with these amps is kind of a pretty nice characteristic there, instead of me just turning the mids down all the way. And again, when we look at the cabinets, it's another V30. What's different here is I'm using a 57 at the cap edge. That's at a 45-degree angle. And then again, we see that 47 FET, and I've been finding myself putting that mic on a lot of my heavier sounds whenever I'm doing some tone building. And then for the reverb, I'm using this dynamic ambience. And for those of us who maybe haven't messed around with the dynamic ambience, it applies that reverb effect to your tone without it being too noticeable, if that makes sense. We like to add this to a lot of our presets because it's almost as if it adds the room sound. With what you've noticed with these new impulse response, this impulse response based cab engine that we have, one parameter you may notice that we don't have anymore is the early reflections. And that's what you'll find if we go into our legacy cabinets is, they modeled the reflections of the room. And so with these new impulse responses, that room sound wasn't captured really. And so I don't have an early reflections parameter with these cabinets. So if that's something you enjoyed using, or something you just like to add in to give kind of a this realistic feel of air moving in a room, throw up a dynamic ambience. And obviously if you want that effect to be more noticeable, you can make the room size bigger by going up to 10 or 12 meters and increasing the pre-delay. And what will really make it more noticeable is the shape. And so if I crank up the shape, it's going to make these reflections later. If I turn down the shape, it's going to make these reflections early. And so, with this kind of an amp and, over, a live stream, you may not hear it. But if I wanted a little more of that room sound bouncing back, I could turn up those late reflections. Maybe I'll go up to 50. And we see... it's not a huge difference, but I could turn up the pre-delay a bit and even turn up the shape more. Go up to 10 meters. And it's just there. It's like a little slap. And so turn up the mix a bit. It's just slightly there, so it kind of just adds that nice room sound. It's just that little tail at the end. And so for those of us who haven't messed around with the dynamic ambience, check that out for sure. But yeah, Chris, I would say, these have been like my 3 go-tos lately. What I've been messing around with, for those of us who are on our Instagram page, we've been doing some amps of the week, and I just kind of dove into more high gain models, for that project. And so that's where I found this Mandarin Rocker is really good, and so these are the 3 I've been juggling recently, that I've been digging. And so, yeah, man, I think what you had going on was really, really good as well. I thought how you, I'm going to go to the double view here. I thought how you kind of broke them down by not only genre but by era was really, really clever. And so, yeah, man, that's what I've been digging on lately. But I must say, what you had over there was cooking, man. Really, really good.
Thanks, man. And it's really funny because I just made these presets up, and as I was saying subconsciously, I just made presets that were kind of era specific sounding in a way. So it's fun. I wouldn't say I wouldn't say I'm clever in any way because it just came up like that. But yeah, it was a lot of fun, and your presets were awesome. The electric with the overdrive you put in front, it really got to a point where the amp was sizzling, man. It was really, really hot. And then the archetype lead is a funny one for me. It's not the amp that I use the most, but it's such a killer amp, especially for rhythm, because it is so tight and so clean in the way that it sounds with rhythm. It's really I wouldn't know how to say it, but it cuts so much. You can hear every detail and nuance. It's really a killer amp, and obviously you made it sound really awesome. So a lot of it would be on you because you dialed in all the settings and the cabs and everything, and it was just a killer set of presets, man. So yeah, and the beauty with these is most of them will be able to do more than what we did today. They're going to be able to cover lower gain stuff. For the example of the solo lead, there's a crunch channel to it, like Jake said earlier today in the stream. So it's going to cover a lot of ground as well. They also can clean up real good with the volume knob of your guitar. So there's a ton of ways that you could use these amp models, not just in a way that in the way that we use them today for higher gain stuff. So they're really killer, and I hope that some of them weren't models that you guys were using, and I hope it's going to make you use them now, because it's full of surprising stuff that we don't necessarily think of using all the time, and then once we really try to make something out of them, you find that there's something to them that it's going to be good no matter what. So it all depends on what you put in front and after it. Those amp models paired with the right cab and mic, it's going to pretty much almost sound killer. With a good overdrive in front, you can't go wrong. So it's really cool stuff, and you can play pretty much everything with those, except maybe for the real clean stuff like jazzy. But it's otherwise, for everything that's rock adjacent, it's going to be killer every time.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a testament to the modeling, like how you're saying how you can just roll down the volume on your guitar and clean it up a bit. And an amp like the Archetype Lead, how it can be that versatile. That's just rolling the volume down a bit. If we just kind of crank it up, so it again, it's a testament to the modeling. You could just really get that tone that you're looking for, and for really any kind of part you're doing in any song that you're writing, or really any band you're in. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's like, sometimes you don't really think of certain amps as amps to go to for what you're looking at. And there's so many other good ones in there too that you and I didn't touch base on. Just looking at my model list now, like the Rev Gen Red, like that amp is just high octane. I mean, it's just loaded. It's a dragster going down the quarter mile. There's just so much gain there, but it sounds good. And there's just something about this new cab engine that just really, you feel and hear the air moving. But no, thank you for your kind words, Chris. I think that's pretty much it. Looks like we're at 11:45. I know we, got in about 6-7 minutes behind, so I think we made up for that. That's all I had. I just wanted to say I really enjoyed what you had there, Chris. Was there anything else you had, or anything else you wanted to add to the stream before we part our ways today?
Well, there's nothing I need to add in terms of the presets that we talked about today, but just wanted to thank you, Nick, for having me on your streams for the past couple of weeks. It's been a blast, and I hope that we were able to have a lot of fun together, and I hope that it was fun for the viewers as well. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for having me on your streams, and it was a blast, and you always came up with killer stuff, and I'll just cheer you on when you're doing solo streams again in the future, man.
Oh, dude, the pleasure is mine, man. And same over here. You really added a breath of fresh air to these streams, because you could even ask Tony. We've been doing these streams for a while and kind of doing this same whole idea of like, hey, here's a subject, let's dive into it. And of course our viewers always make it fun and interesting, because they hit us with curveballs and questions, and that's what makes it fun and gets us thinking on our feet. But no, you've definitely added a great dynamic to the team. It's been a great amount of fun doing these with you, and again, like I said, a breath of fresh air. So, and thank you for all the work you've put into it as well. And I look forward to seeing you doing your streams on your own as well, which are coming up pretty soon. I think next week you're going up with Tony, like you were saying, and so after that, it's going to be the Chris Payeur show, man, all the way, and we'll be there in support. And I look forward to the viewers, and and especially reaching that French Canadian audience of yours as well. That's going to be killer. So without further ado, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you everyone for watching today. Make sure to tune in at 11 a.m. PST next week for Chris and Tony. And other than that, as Tony would say, stick a fork in me. I am done. That is all for today. Take care, everyone. Chris, you take care as well, and we will see you at the next stream, everyone.
Have a good day, everyone. Bye.